Hello and welcome to TVOL, where we talk about tactics and their evolution. Today we're going to be focusing on a match between Manchester City and Arsenal, which resulted in a 2-1 victory for Man City. A lot of the in-game and post-game analysis of the match focus on the emotion generated by the VAR decisions. We're going to bypass that and try to analyse exactly what happened and the degree to which Arsenal were unlucky to lose, as many have suggested. What we like to do at TVOL is use available data to take as much of the subjectivity out of the conversation as possible. So we start here with, from a City perspective, expected goals for, expected goals against, and expected goal difference per match since the beginning of the Premier League season. You can see that the expected goals were relatively similar for Manchester City in the blue line versus the one expected goal from an Arsenal perspective. Of course, this is distorted somewhat by the penalty decision, but what we can see here is from a chances created point of view, it was a reasonably even match with City, let's say, having a slight edge. The purpose of showing this information is to demonstrate clearly that Arsenal did not make a high number of clear-cut chances. Maybe you could argue that a fairer result would have been a draw, but they were hardly robbed. What they did do is put Manchester City under a lot of pressure in their own Manchester City's defensive third, which they haven't had to deal with many times this season. So Arsenal put them under more pressure, which we'll go on to demonstrate later in the video. In fact, than any other team so far this season. But the approach that Manchester City took to defending, and in particular defending against counter-attacks and transition moments, really limited Arsenal to low probability scoring opportunities, which is why you can't say that they dominated the match, even leaving aside the effect of the sending off. They didn't dominate the match in the first half. They put Manchester City under a lot of pressure, but to a large extent Manchester City were able to absorb that and, as I've said, limit Arsenal to low probability scoring opportunities. Now we're going to explain that point of view with reference to some screenshots demonstrating how the match unfolded, starting with Arsenal's approach to pressurising Manchester City in their own defensive third. So here you see really early on in the match, City building out from the back, forming a back three in effect, including Ederson looking to play the ball into Rodri. Lacazette is pressed high, as is Saka, Odegaard and Martinelli. So a very brave approach from Arsenal, putting City under a lot of pressure. They continue to do that, moving across to the left-hand side in order to cover the pass from Rodri, which is coming into Cancelo, where he's going to look to play a 1-2. The key thing about this is how Partey, who is highlighted towards the left-hand side, is backing up this press in a kind of second stage effect, which is crucial. So Rodri receives the ball back here from Cancelo and is then looking to play into the feet of Bernardo Silva. But what Partey does is he shifts across in a very brave tactical approach, which we'll reflect on in a second. But he's then able to win the ball back from Silva. So he's in this one-on-one duel versus Silva. He wins the ball, but you can see through the highlighted picture and also through the positioning of De Bruyne that if Arsenal weren't able to exert that pressure and win the ball back, then they'd be in a lot of difficulties on the counter-attack. What they also did, in addition to pressing high up the pitch, and they're not going to press all the time. That doesn't make any sense for any team to do. You can't have this so-called intensity across the entirety of 90 minutes. So they use pressing triggers, and one of the well-known ones that Manchester City use, and of course through Arteta, Arsenal use as well, is when a player, like in this case, the ball is received by the player with his back to goal, then that involves a pressing trigger. So Partey then moves out in order to close that down. The idea of this pressing trigger, of course, is that you're forcing the opposition back towards their own goal. Here you see a similar example. This time the pressing trigger is the ball is being played by Ake down the line to Sterling. He both has his back to goal, plus he's near to the touchline, which in effect acts as an extra defender. So Tomiyasu is brave and moves out. I say brave, I mean it's all part of a defensive tactical plan by Arteta, but he moves out, let's say, aggressively onto Sterling, and Arsenal are able to win the ball back. Let's back up that observation with some data. The same format as before. We've got the games so far played by Manchester City in the Premier League. What we're looking at here is opposition presses in the attacking third. So not pressing in general, the extent to which they put the opposition, in this case Manchester City, under pressure in Manchester City's defensive third. Touches in the defensive third as well. And then we're looking at, crucially, the opposition presses per touch in the attacking third, so that we've got the right starting point from which to analyse the data. So what this is a measure of, if you move to the right-hand side, the 0.29, is the extent to which Arsenal put Manchester City under pressure, given the amount, crucially, of possession that Manchester City had in their own defensive third. So if they don't have touches of the ball in their own defensive third, then you can't press them quite high up. So it takes that into account. 0.29 is the highest figure. So in summary, Manchester City suffered the most amount of pressure in their own defensive third, more than they have done during the course of the rest of the season. So they put City under pressure, but what did they do with the ball when they won it back, or what did they do in possession? Here we can see some really positive examples, but crucially City, what they're doing is they're forcing Arsenal play wide. So Partey comes onto the ball, he plays the ball out towards the left-hand touchline to Martinelli. City adopt, as I've said before, a relatively narrow formation, and the point is that they're extremely disciplined about getting into this narrow formation, often with two covering midfielders, in this case Silva and De Bruyne ahead of them, forcing Martinelli into a wide left shooting position. So they do get a shot. I don't think this is one on target, but it's from a narrow angle, so relatively difficult to score from. Also, they're closing down a lot of the opportunities to cut the ball back, for example, to Saka there on the right hand side. In this other passage of play, what happens here is that Bernardo Silva uncharacteristically gives the ball away. Arsenal are then able to break. But the point of these boxes here is that Arsenal are prevented access to that central region by the defensive block of Manchester City. I think it's Rodri and Cancelo. Here Martinelli, who had the most shots for Arsenal, I think had 5 shots. I think a couple of other players had one each. So he was very prominent. He was playing on the left-hand side, so you'd expect him to be wide. But the point here is that City are forcing Arsenal in general to play the ball wide, and you end up with quite a similar scenario here, where Martinelli does get a shot in on goal, but his options are restricted, and it's a relatively low probability scoring opportunity. Moving back to the data perspective, this is a measure of progressive passes. The progressive passes that Manchester City have allowed the opposition to make so far this season. And you can see that the figure against Arsenal is relatively high. So as a proportion of the passes that Arsenal made overall, their progressive passes are quite high, which is a reasonable proxy or indication that they're not only moving the ball from side to side looking for openings, they were able to move more directly through Manchester City's block and through at times their press. There is a more elaborate or an explanation of what progressive passes are in a separate video, which I'll link at the end of this video. Arsenal put Manchester City under a lot of pressure in this match. They were able to move the ball effectively, progressively through the thirds, but they weren't able to generate a huge number of shots. And if you don't shoot, you don't score. So what this is measuring in the blue is opposition shots against Manchester City. So the latest numbers would be the Arsenal match, of course. It then looks at that versus the amount of touches that you have in the attacking third, because it's important to do this with this kind of data rather than just looking at the volume overall, because if you hardly have any of the ball, then obviously you're not going to take very many shots. So this is looking at a ratio here of the number of shots taken, in this case by Arsenal, per touch in the attacking third, and we can see there that the number 0.06 is really low. I think they took 7 shots in the match. Manchester City took many more. of course, the sending off and how that affected the second half and the game state there would have a big influence. But the point remains, and if you rewatch the match, I think this is really clear. Arsenal do a lot of things really, really effectively. They put Manchester City under a lot of pressure. They're able to move the ball through the thirds, and they're able to pin Manchester City back, but they're not able to convert those into great goal-scoring opportunities. And it's not just the second half. You can see that in the first half as well. Now we're going to look at the goal that Arsenal scored, because it helps us to make a few points about the match in general. So De Bruyne loses out in possession to Arsenal here. The ball is played up to Partey. You can see that Manchester City are relatively spread out, which you don't tend to see in transition moments. May have been exacerbated by the position of Ake playing, of course, out of position. You can see that there towards the bottom right hand side. There's too much of a gap between Ake and Laporte, and also what you have is poor coverage of players like Odegaard, who are able to fairly quickly and easily, under relatively little pressure, move the ball out to Tierney, who is particularly effective in this sort of inverted or half space position. He plays the ball, of course, into the feet of Saka, who's able to finish smartly. So from a Manchester City point of view, this is one of the only moments in the match where they were laps from a defensive organisation point of view, defending against the counter and defending in transition. I would also really want to highlight the movement of Lacazette. It doesn't always come through in the commentary, but what he does really, really crucially here is that he moves back, effectively blocks off Ake, who would have been picking up Saka. Laporte is maybe slow to block Saka's movement, but the movement of Lacazette is crucial to the scoring of this goal. So what we're seeing in this analysis here is that Arsenal did a lot of things really, really well, and would provide something of a blueprint to other Premier League opposition for Manchester City in the coming weeks and months. But again, they're putting Manchester City under a lot of pressure. They're progressing the ball forward through the lines really effectively, but they didn't take very many shots, and the shots that they took were relatively low probability opportunities, which is reflected in the 1 XG that they had. Martinelli had 5 of the shots, as I mentioned earlier. You can see towards the right hand side that a lot of those shots were towards the left hand side of Manchester City's penalty box. You can see by contrast, yes, the effect of the sending off and what happened in the second half would play into this, but you can see how Manchester City, as is characteristic of their teams, just look at the concentration of shots and chances that they have in and around the centre rather than on the periphery, on the side of the penalty box. This is why they score so many goals. But the thing that marks out Manchester City and why I believe that they are going to win the league, probably in the end quite comfortably, is actually their defensive organisation, which isn't sort of an exciting thing to talk about as other things in football, but I think it's the thing that distinguishes them for this season, at least, versus their opposition. And thank you very much for listening. If you like this video, please express that by hitting the like button. While you're there, you may as well subscribe to the channel, and why not leave me a comment with your views, and I'll get back to you. What we like to do on TiVo is observe how the match plays out. Many people do that, but combine that with the use of data to take a lot of the subjectivity out of the discussion. I really wanted to make this slightly longer video because I did feel that the commentary and analysis around this particular match was actually not a good representation of what actually unfolded.